How reciprocal tariffs work. President Donald Trump has decided to impose the same level of tariffs on goods coming into the US as others charge on US exports. How will this impact the framework of global trade and specifically India? United States President Donald Trump on Thursday unveiled a plan to hit the whole world with reciprocal tariffs, potentially signaling the end of existing trade rules and sending things back almost a century in terms of how countries do business with another. The reciprocal tariffs will likely be imposed after April 1. The US Trade Department is supposed to work out the details for each country by then. Tariffs are taxes imposed by an importing country on foreign goods coming into that country. For a consumer, they raise the price of an imported good and in effect throw mud in the wheels of global trade. Over the past century, more so since the end of the World War II, the world has moved towards freer trade in goods. That is, lower tariffs or no tariffs. There has been a consensus, especially among developed countries, that freer trade is mutually beneficial for all parties involved. But there is an important caveat. As rules of the world trade are being framed, think about GATT and World Trade Organization. It was agreed that developing countries would get special and differential treatment, and since they often did not have robust industrial sector or an efficient farm economy to compete or an even nail with the developed countries. As such, developed countries having lower tariffs than developing ones was considered to be the fair deal, one that ensured that a country like India could prevent cheap food grains from the rich produced by rich farmers in the Europe and US from flooding its market. The Trump's reciprocal tariffs do away with this caveat, at least on paper. Simply put, Trump has announced that US will charge the same level of tariffs on goods coming into the US as others are charging on US exports. This, Trump argues, is only fair. And how will these reciprocal tariffs be calculated? The Trade Department in the process of making this calculation. How the US intends to make this calculation is crucial. To be sure, the US doesn't want to simply mirror the tariff levels with each country. President Trump has suggested that officials would look at the whole gamut of subsidies and other help that countries provide their traders when they compete with the US. This could mean that developing countries such as India, which provide all kinds of subsidies to exporters, will face the biggest tariff burdens going forward. Based on the information obtained under the RTI Act, Indian Express reported on Thursday that Indian government has disbursed $1 billion between 22 to 24 to companies in India under the PLI scheme to boost exports of mobile phone handsets. The PLI scheme is essentially a subsidy to companies. Why does Trump want reciprocal tariffs? Trump is not driven by a single reason, nor he is signaling out any country for this action. While China is the United States' biggest competition, Trump's first tariff threats were made to its allies Canada and Mexico, two of the country's closest trading partners. On Thursday, he also came down severely on European Union, claiming that EU rules and codes have treated US companies unfairly. If there is one overwhelming reason for Trump's tariffs, it is his dislike of trade deficits, which refers to a situation where the value of goods imported by any country exceeds the value of goods it exports. The US trade deficit with the rest of the world, that is difference between the value of its imports and exports, is closing in on $1 trillion, even as China enjoys a trade surplus of more than $1 trillion. Trump sees deficits as fair, a marker of the fact that the rest of the world is cheating the US. As such, the president is out to remove all trade deficits. There are two ways to do this. One, by forcing other countries to import American goods, and two, by getting other countries to set up shop in the US instead of exporting to the country. At one level, the US trade deficit with India does indicate that more money is flowing out of the US then coming in, it also appears to be a marker of American dependence on India. However, in a global setting where countries trade with each other freely and fairly, a trade deficit is just an accounting exercise. For instance, India may have a trade surplus with the US. It also has trade deficits with its other trading partners such as China. So it is his dislike of trade deficits, which refers to a situation where value of goods imported exceed the value of good it exports. The U.S. trade deficit with the rest of the world, that is difference between value of its exports and imports is closing in on $1 trillion, even as China enjoys a trade surplus of $1 trillion. Trump sees deficits as unfair, a marker of the fact that rest of the world is cheating the US. As such, the president is out to remove all trade deficits. There are two ways to do this: one by forcing the other countries to import American goods, and two by getting other countries to set up shop in the US instead of exporting the other countries. Import American goods, and two, by getting other countries to set up shop in the US. At one level, US trade deficit with India does indicate that more money is flowing out of the US than coming in. It also appears to be a marker of American dependence on India. However, in a global setting, when countries trade with each other freely and fairly, a trade deficit is just an accounting exercise. For instance, India may have a trade surplus with the US, but it also has trade deficits with its other trading partners such as China. Trade deficit or surplus does show the relative strength of one country's exporters vis-a-vis the others. At the same time, it also indicates that consumers are able to enjoy goods at a cheaper price. While the sustainable way to remove deficits is to boost domestic production efficiency, economic wisdom lies in understanding not just that no country enjoys an absolute advantage in all goods over all other countries when it comes to trade, but also that free trade helps even when a country somehow does enjoy an absolute advantage. What will be the impact of US reciprocal tariffs on India? Trump singled out India as being a country right on top of the list of those charged tremendous tariffs, giving the example of iconic American motorcycle company Harley Davidson failing to sell their bikes in India as the tax was so high. As various reports suggest, India is likely to buy more and more US goods, such as defense equipment, oil, and gas, to balance the trade. It is also possible that other US goods will become cheaper and more affordable for Indians in the coming days. As such, trade deficit that the US has with India can be expected to narrow, but this would mean that Indian rupee will weaken further against the US dollar. This is because more dollars will be demanded as more American products are imported. More dollars will be demanded because more American products are imported. More dollars will be demanded because more American products are imported. What should be noted is that development center comes after the finance minister provided 1 lakh crore tax break to Indian income taxpayers in the union budget presented this month. This was seen as a boost to domestic consumption and fuel GDP growth. There is, however, a good chance that the richest Indians whom the tax break targeted may spend this tax relief on American products more so if they suddenly become cheaper. This in turn may mean that anticipated consumption boost to India's GDP may not happen to the extent imagined by the government. Over the medium to long term, India and Indian consumers can benefit if American goods are available at a cheaper price, not to mention the broader benefits that an association with the world's largest economy can provide as India attempts to become a developed country by 2047. That said, India's bid to become Atmanirbhar, self-reliant, may take a hit as the US forces India to buy more of its goods. That said, India's bid to become Atmanirbhar may take a hit as US forces India to buy more of its good. What should be noted here that the development comes just after Finance Minister provided 1 lakh crore tax break to Indian income taxpayer in the union budget last month. This was seen as a boost domestic consumption and fuel GDP growth. There is, however, a good chance that the richest Indians, whom the tax break targeted, may spend this tax relief on American products more so if they suddenly become cheaper. This in turn may mean that anticipated consumption boost to India's GDP may not happen to the extent imagined by the government. Over the medium to long term, India and Indian consumers can benefit if American goods are available at a cheaper price, not to mention the broader benefits that an association with the world's largest economy can provide as India attempts to become developed country by 2047. US designed reactors, SMRs, and why the 123 agreement could finally realize its full potential, as India and United States affirm their commitment to furthering a bilateral energy security partnership, an agreement that aims to make Washington a leading supplier of oil and gas to India is in focus. However, this pact is being seen by both sides primarily as a means to bridge their trade deficit. Far more strategic is an announcement that signals their commitment to fully realize the US India 123 civil nuclear agreement alongside a pledge to move forward on plans to work together to build American designed nuclear reactors in India. The two sides took note of the announcement by the Indian government in the Union Budget to take up amendments to the Atomic Energy Act 1962 and Civil Liability for Nuclear Damage Act 2010 for nuclear reactors. It was decided to establish bilateral arrangements in accordance with Civil Liability for Nuclear Damage Act, which would address the issue of civil liability and facilitate the collaboration of Indian and US industry in the production and deployment of nuclear reactors. It has learned that Washington wanted to secure India's commitment on bringing a law in Parliament to ease the nuclear liability provision, but New Delhi was initially willing to offer only an assurance. The concern on the American side is the NDA government's reduced numbers in parliament could make it difficult to get the amendments to the liability law passed. The statement issued by Ministry of External Affairs on Thursday reiterated the commitment to take up amendments to both laws. The path followed will unlock plans to build large US designed reactors and enable collaboration to develop, deploy, and scale up nuclear power generation with advanced small modular reactors. While New Delhi has onerous legislative commitments to set this partnership rolling as envisaged in the 123 agreement of July 2007, it has sought a major commitment from Washington as well. It is seeking an exemption to one of the most restrictive of American legislative provisions, the 810 authorization that explicitly restricts US companies from manufacturing any nuclear equipment or performing any nuclear design work outside of the US. The 123 agreement provided for full civil nuclear energy cooperation, covering the nuclear reactors and aspects of the associated nuclear fuel cycle, including enrichment and reprocessing. The 810 provision, Part 810 of Title 10 Code of Federal Regulations of the U.S. Atomic Energy Act of 1954, allows American nuclear power companies to export to countries such as India under some strict safeguards, but restricts them from manufacturing any nuclear equipment or performing any nuclear design work outside the US. This authorization is essentially a non starter for New Delhi's small modular reactors ambitions. Since it wants to participate in manufacturing these reactors being built in India and to co produce the nuclear components for its domestic needs. The statement issued by the Ministry of External Affairs reiterated the commitment to take up the amendments to both laws. Path Forward will unlock plans to build large US designed reactors and enable collaboration to develop, deploy, scale up nuclear power generation with advanced small modular reactors. While New Delhi has onerous legislative commitments to set this partnership rolling, it has sought major commitment from Washington as well. It is seeking an exemption to one of the most restrictive of American legislative provisions, 810 authorization of that explicitly restricts US companies from manufacturing any nuclear equipment or performing any nuclear design work outside of the US. 123 agreement provided for full civil nuclear energy cooperation covering nuclear reactors and aspects of the associated nuclear fuel cell cycle, including enrichment and reprocessing. 810 provision allows American nuclear power companies to export to countries such as India under strict safeguard, but restricts them from manufacturing any nuclear equipment or performing any nuclear design out of the US. The 1962 Act, the proposed changes to the Atomic Energy Act, are aimed at opening the door wider to let the private sector into nuclear power plant operations and to enable them to enter the SMR sector as operators. This is currently allowed only to state owned NPCIL and some joint ventures between NPCIL and state owned companies such as NTPC and NALCO. 2010 Act, Civil Liability for Nuclear Damage Act, has sought to create a mechanism to compensate victims for a possible nuclear accident and allocate liability and specify procedures for compensation. These provisions have been cited as an impediment by foreign players such as GE, Hitachi, and Westinghouse to invest in India, primarily on the grounds that the legislation channelized operations liability to equipment suppliers. Foreign vendors have flagged this as a disincentive to invest in India's nuclear sector amid apprehensions of incurring future liability. On the SMR deal, India's Department of Atomic Energy is learned to be in exploratory talks for collaborations with the Camden, New Jersey-based Holtock International, a private company that is now built to be one of the world's largest exporters of capital nuclear components. The 810 authorization is vital for this to go forward. The Biden administration is learned to have initiated work on an authorization to hold tech towards the end of its tenure. There are indications that this will be taken forward by the new administration, potentially opening the doors for leveraging commercial potential of the Indo-US civil nuclear deal almost 2 decades after it was concluded. SMR's reactors with a capacity of 30 megawatt electric to 300 megawatt electric per unit are increasingly seen as an important for nuclear energy to remain commercially competitive option in the future. India is pushing for a leadership position in this small sector's reactor space as a way for fulfilling its commitment to clean energy transition and bundling SMRs as a technology-led foreign policy pitch. Currently, two SMR projects have reached the operational stage globally. The academic Lomonosov floating power unit in Russia, which has two modules of 35 megawatt electric, started its commercial operations in May 2020. The other demonstration SMR project, called STR-PM in China, was a grid connected in December 2021. It's reported to have started commercial operations in December 2023. So SMRs, reactors with a capacity of 30 megawatt electric to 300 megawatt electric per unit, are increasingly seen as important. India is pushing for a leadership position in the small reactor space, both as a way of fulfilling its commitment to clean energy transition and of bundling SMRs as a technology-led foreign policy pitch. Currently, two SMRs have reached the operational stage globally. The academic Lomonosov floating power unit in Russia, Academic Lomonosov floating power unit in Russia, two modules of 30 megawatt electric each, and STR-PM in China, SMR project called STR-PM in China, Academic Lomonosov and STR-PM in China. Note of caution: what bilateral trade deal with US could mean for India. In top imports from the US, India imports mineral oils, mineral fuels and oils 12.96%, percent precious semi-precious stones 5%, nuclear energy boilers 3.75%. Oh, these values are billion. So $12 billion, mineral oil and fuels, precious semi-precious metals of $5 billion, nuclear reactors of $3.75 billion, electrical machinery, aircraft and parts of $2.25 billion. India exports them engineering goods of $17 billion, electronic goods of $10 billion, and gems and jewelry of $9.9 billion, drugs and pharmaceuticals and petroleum products. So, Prime Minister Narendra Modi and United States President Donald Trump has announced plans to negotiate the first tranche of mutually beneficial multi-sectoral multi-sector bilateral trade agreement this year. Multi-sector bilateral trade agreement this year. A BTA is narrower in scope. A BTA is narrower in scope than FTA and is focused on specific goods rather than the overall trade liberalization. The two countries have committed to designating senior representatives to advance trade negotiations, according to the joint statement released after the meeting between leaders on Thursday. India and US will work together increasing market access and reducing tariffs and non-tariff barriers, the joint statement said. However, the Trump also has has also been making repeated threats of imposing trade tariffs on countries around the world. Hours after meeting Prime Minister, he announced reciprocal tariffs on all countries, including India, to restore fairness in the US trade relationships. Trump has already imposed 25% tariffs on US aluminum and steel imports, impacting Indian exports. During the joint press briefing with Modi, he complained about India's high tariff structure that prevented American products such as cars from accessing the Indian market. He described this as a big problem and indicated that US aims to bridge the trade gap by selling more oil and gas to India. Given the loss of American jobs, especially industrial jobs following China's entry into the World Trade Organization, sentiment among the US lawmakers turned against granting easy market access to foreign goods. The think tank National Bureau of Economic Research noted in 2017 paper the correlation between growing import competition between China and a rightward shift in political beliefs of adult Americans. Trump's fair and reciprocal plan on trade announced on Thursday def- said the US trade deficit exceeded $1 trillion in 24. India and US have agreed to explore the possibility of a trade agreement earlier too. The US led 14 member IPEF Indo Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity, of which India is a part, could not agree on trade pillar as it did not offer tariff reductions or increased market access to the US market. India and US have agreed to explore the possibility of a trade agreement earlier too. The US led 14 member Indo-Pacific Partnership for Peace Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity Indo-Pacific Economic Framework IPEF Indo-Pacific Economic Framework IPEF, of which India is a part, could not agree on the trade pillar as it did not offer tariff reductions on increased market access to the US market. The White House fact sheet on reciprocal trade issued on Thursday pointed out that while the US average applied most favored nation tariff on agricultural goods is 5% and that of India is 39%, India also charges 100% tariff on US motorcycles while we only charge a 2.4% tariff on Indian motorcycles. On the trade deficit with the US, Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri said India is a significant purchaser of American energy, having brought about $15 billion worth of energy output last year. There is good chance that this figure will rise as much as $25 billion in the near future. It is entirely possible that these increased purchases will contribute to addressing the trade deficit between the two countries as well. India's good trade surplus with the US doubled from $17 billion in 2019-20 to $35 billion in 23-24, while exports of electronic and engineering goods have surged. Traditional exports such as gems and jewelry have remained largely unchanged. Over the past 5 years, India's imports have grown at a slower pace than its exports. US exports rose to $42 billion in 23-24 from 35 in 2019-20. Mineral fuels was the largest segment, followed by precious semi-precious stones. Mineral fuels followed by precious semi-precious stones, nuclear reactors, electrical machinery, and aircraft and parts. Given the loss of American jobs, especially industrial jobs, following China's entry into the World Trade Organization, sentiment among US lawmakers have turned against granting easy market access to growing foreign markets. In his first term, Trump stopped the Generalized System of Preferences program that gave India duty free access to Indian goods worth more than $5 billion. Trade experts said the BTA would likely mean lower Indian tariffs on American goods. Lower Indian tariffs on American goods, since average US tariffs are already among the lowest in the world. They said that due to India's generally higher average tariff levels compared to competing nations, and the fact that India has entered into few FTAs than many of its competitors, trade margins that other countries secure in agreements are typically more favorable than those India secures. A 22 report by Delhi Policy Group said tariff imbalances were a key reason why Asian countries' exports to India were more than imports. Tariff imbalances were a key reason. Tariff imbalances was a key reason why Asian countries' exports to India were more than imports. Also, think tank Global Research Institute cautioned that the Trump administration does not respect FTAs. It has, for example, imposed tariffs on imports of steel and aluminium from Mexico and Canada in violation of the US Mexico Canada Agreement. So that's all for today. See you in the next one.